So yeah, HTTP, as you all are very much familiar and aware, right? So it's a protocol basically. Now it allows connect to entities in the internet, right? So using HTTP protocol, we can send or receive messages via internet. So basically, the main architecture of HTTP is request and response mode. So it's just there will be a client, there will be a server. Client will send message, and server will give us the response. But yeah, a lot of things happens in this process, like when you send a request, how the requests are identified by the client, now what kind of response client will be sending back, right? So we will see all those things one by one today. But yeah, just remember, like it is a very simple client server architecture. It works in request response model. So again, coming to basic, there are two terms here you need to pay attention to. One is URI and one is URL. Again, you might have heard about these two terminologies, but I will explain one more time. So URL is, on the full form is Uniform Resource Locator, right? So as the name suggests, it locates or address now physical address of a resource in the internet. So it can be the address of a file or address of any file or address of any images. It can be address of your CSS file, or maybe some HTML file, JS file, or whatever images you are using in your web application, right? So it can be any locator or address, right? So and it points to a basically a physical address where suppose you have a web application, right? So you have deployed your web application in any server. So as per the implementation process you follow, right, you will be having folder structures and all, right? And in under those folder structures, you may maintain some folder for images, some folders for all your static pages, right? So using URL, you can locate all those resources. Uh, there is a very similarity between URL and URI. So URI is full form is Uniform Resource Identifier. So how URI is actually different from URL? Basically, URI is a, you can consider is a string, to identify a resource running on some server. Now when URL points to a physical resource, like static resource like file and pages, URI points to a virtual or logical resource here. So for example, right, so you might have created a database for no users, right? So users again will be an entity or object for you. So URI, and you are giving a URI for the customers to access that resource, right? Or that profile, basically, like www your domain dot slash users slash user ID. So that we will consider as a uniform resource identifier. So it will basically identify a specific resource no from a REST services point of view. Okay, so all the resource available you should be able to identify uniquely. Okay, so an URI give you that facility. Basically URI you can now consider as a superset here, and URL also will be having that. But yeah, so URL mainly we use this term to specify a very specific file or static kind of resources. So let me show you in example. Okay, so let's open any. Okay, I will open a website, indiatimes.com. Okay, if you see here, there are many pages, many images, no, are getting loaded. Now, if you see indiatimes.com, right? So we know like, okay, this might be no, mapped to their index.html file. So this is a URL for us. Okay. Then probably I'll go to some news, right? If you see here in the browser on a status bar, you can see a, under news, then India, then you're getting a, HTML page, right? So static page basically. And you can make out that, okay, this page has been, kept under news, in the root folder under news, under India. Okay. So these are the subfolders, and you can very well make out, okay, this is pointing to a HTML page, right? This the entire thing, right? So up to from the HTTPS www.indiatimes.com, this entire thing you can consider as a URL, okay, because this is pointing to a static resource. Now, similarly for images, suppose let's consider some image. If you see, copy the image address. I'll open the image now. You can see here, right? So this image is actually, you can see the name of the image also. This is a JPEG image, and now we are specifying the width and the height of the image also. And that image is part of a folder called content 2021 November, right? That means where the India Times is hosted in some server, right? We don't know where exactly that server is, but we can at least assume that that server might be having some folders like content. Yeah. So it has a folder called content 2021 November. Okay. So this is the file, and you can see the image here. Okay. If you see URI also, URI is also an URL. Okay. So URI basically points to a virtual resource, not a physical resource. Now these things are physical resource, right? Because you can easily locate this image or all the HTML pages in your folders, basically, right, in your server. But what is a physical resource? Like, suppose you have created, user profile, you have created maybe order entity, right, user entities, right, to support like multiple users, right? So each record will be a virtual entity, right? So user 1, user 2, user 3, and in the UI, right, so you will be accessing those entities, right? So via APIs basically. Okay. So now we know what is URL, right? So URI is basically, URI term is mainly used in terms of the REST services or web services, right? Where we can locate each entity separately. For example, you want to locate a user, basically, right? So when you log in, right? So it will give the details of your user name, password, and all those stuff, right? So that is actually URI. So if you are doing any CRUD operation, so each operation will be having a specific URI. So for example, I'm just showing one example here. So basically this CRUD website, right? So it's allowing us to create some CRUD operations and in their sandbox environment. Okay. So basically if you see here, that is telling like, okay, you are getting this particular URL, right? So API / your some ID. Okay, and it is providing some other endpoints or URIs. For example, when you are creating something, right, so it will give you / then that particular resource ID. Okay, and then you can actually get means you can extract the information of that particular resource using the ID, right? And then you can even update it, or you can delete it. So this type of string, we generally call it URI. So it is actually a specific to a particular resource. Okay, so for example, you are creating a user resource, and I'll write it here. So suppose no, you have something called domain. Okay, so HTTP as your domain, and you are allowing to create users, for example, right? So users, then your ID is like 1234. Okay, so this particular string we will consider as a URI. Okay, so this is actually giving me access to a virtual object in the server. There may not be any physical location. Physical location is like an record or raw data, right? Here when you create a user, it will be stored in a database. But how the front end application actually get a handle of this, right? So because in the front end application, suppose you created a user in your name, like front end has to show you the profile you have created, right? If the process is successful, I will come to the point like how we create all those things. But for time being, just consider that you have created your user profile, and server has generated an ID, and the client application has to show your details, like maybe your address, your phone number, right? Your maybe social media handles, all the information you have given to them, and how the client application is giving no access to your profile to you via URI.